The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. We are back with another week of the Hard Rock Empire here on the Nerdcast Empire. I am Matt in the studio. Great to have you along with us. It is Sunday, June the 8th, 2025, and we are back with another week of the best hard rock and heavy metal. And we're going to be looking at the music of May the 16th this week, and it was, thankfully, after a couple of thinner weeks, a much better, stronger week of music. So we're excited to bring you 4 new albums that you'll be able to check out on today's edition of the Hard Rock Empire. Of course, we'll go through news headlines. We'll talk about a couple classic albums in the vault. And then, of course, we will get to our question of the week, which is the Power Trio. Joining me in studio, as always, is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
It's going. Yeah, it's been a busy week. Kind of disappointed I didn't get a chance to go up to the Mad with Power Festival over the weekend. A lot of really cool power metal bands, and just kind of an awesome-looking atmosphere from what I saw. They streamed it on Twitch, on the Lords of the Trident Twitch page. Really hoping they're able to keep it going. I think they kind of suffered some financial issues this past run because of some of the visa issues they experienced with some of the European bands. But all in all, it looked like a really cool festival. Looking forward to getting into the music this week. Kind of had some maybe off-the-beaten-path choices to run through, but good as always.
Yeah, for sure, and you know, it's interesting sometimes where we find these bands, and you know, a lot of weeks we have 4 bands from Europe, and this week, you know, not necessarily the case. So we got some more U.S. based bands this week, which is always cool, just to again kind of hear this type of music being produced here in the United States. And we'll talk about those bands coming up in the second segment of our program. We'll get to a few news headlines today before we do that, and you know, I say it a lot that there's just not a lot going on in the news headlines, so kind of picked a little bit more in the way of feature-y type stuff today. And the first article from Blabbermouth, just kind of an interesting piece on Yngwie Malmsteen, kind of talking about his path through his music career. And time to time, when you have a guy like that who's a virtuoso, who is out on his own, has his own thing going, you know, a lot of times some of these big bands will come knocking on his door and say, hey, why don't you join us instead? Or why don't you at least audition? And this article is definitely worth a read. It kind of goes through some of the bands that he was asked to audition for, or was asked to fill in for, or considered jumping into. And in the end, you know, none of them really worked out. It, you know, just didn't decide. Either the band decided to go a different direction, or he decided it wasn't necessarily a good fit. But it is always fascinating when you have somebody like this in the music industry, and there are certainly a handful of examples of guys that, you know, obviously had an amazing career largely on their own, or, you know, they start out with a band and they kind of break free, and it's oftentimes a singer. Obviously with Malmsteen, you're talking about a guitarist, so a little bit different scenario, but yeah, I thought this was just a fascinating article, just kind of talking about what might have been. A lot of those bands are, you know, some of the names that everybody's going to recognize, and Malmsteen, I mean, I'm sure he would have fit in very nicely, but how it might have changed the course of rock history if he would have jumped onto one of these bands. Yeah,
it would have been interesting for sure, but you kind of feel like most of those wouldn't have panned out very well just based on his personality and kind of what he talks about in the interview, saying that when he first came over to the States, he had an offer to join the band UFO.
Yeah.
And basically decided, you know, I don't really want to be a new member of a thing that's not mine. You know, I want to write my own songs. And that was kind of when he joined up with like Graham Bonnet and they formed Alcatraz. Ultimately, that they went their separate ways eventually because of that power struggle where, you know, Malmsteen didn't. I think he and Bonnet both kind of saw themselves as the front man of the band, and can't really have 2 frontmen. So
not very often.
There you go with that. It is kind of funny in the story. They talk about the possibility of him joining Kiss, and the whole height thing comes up again, which Marty Friedman talked about when he was asked to potentially audition for Kiss. One of the big questions was how tall was he, because they wanted someone who was over 6 feet tall. Sadly, Friedman wasn't, but it mentions in the article that Malmsteen is like 6'4", but he didn't know that because he only knew his height in centimeters. So I don't know really how much farther that went on, and honestly, I don't see him coexisting in a creative environment with Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons either.
No.
The other interesting thing is kind of the weird beef that Eddie Van Halen seemed to have with him, even though in the article, Malmsteen really spoke highly of Eddie, talking about how great he was, almost in like an admiring kind of way. So it's kind of weird that it seemed like over the years Eddie would snub him, and even at one point backed out of a concert in Europe because Yngwie Malmsteen was playing there.
It's just weird because obviously two of the all-time great guitarists in rock and metal, and I don't know if there was just if he felt like acknowledging him was somehow putting him on his level. It's just so weird. I mean, when you're talking about the egos of some of these guys, it's hard telling how they've justified that in their head, even when, as the article states, like, he was going around playing Malmsteen stuff. Like, he was listening to it. He was checking it out. So
and then pretended to not know the guy. So I don't know.
Very, very strange. But, the height thing was kind of humorous just because obviously you take for granted now that you can pull out your phone and you can just quickly
do the conversion right there.
Yeah, it's not an unusual thing to, I work with a bunch of guys who are from the UK, and, so when you're talking about like temperatures and stuff like that, I typically try to do it in Celsius because Fahrenheit doesn't mean anything to them, or I'm sure they would get it having worked in North America, but it's interesting now. It would be no big deal, but back then, like you said, I don't think it works out anyway, but it is kind of funny to think that something like that might have at least kept it from happening for a short period of time, which would have been interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And also the article kind of talks about him hanging out with David Lee Roth and Billy Sheehan back in the day too. Like, now I think that would have probably been a more successful creative endeavor, because I think David Lee Roth is David Lee Roth, but I imagine just the enjoyment of like partying with the guy would probably ease a lot of the potential negative sides creatively. But yeah, I mean, Malmsteen's a legend, no doubt about it.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with a lot of his stuff, definitely encourage you to check it out. We featured some of it, obviously, on this podcast over the months, but a true legend of the industry, has just a ton of hit songs, and has really inspired a whole different generation of guitarists. So just an interesting piece. Thought it was kind of funny, so definitely wanted to spotlight that here on the podcast. Maybe a little more serious news, but certainly some kind of good news as far as trying to help out. We talked about earlier in the year about the wildfires in Southern California and the kind of damage they did and some of the effects it had on the music industry. And as we continue on, there have been some tribute concerts to try to raise money. There have been, just charity events in general. And the latest kind of charity piece showed up in Blabbermouth this week with Steve Perry, of course, the longtime frontman for Journey. Has decided that he's going to sell some memorabilia to try to raise money for those wildfire victims, including handwritten lyrics of some of his biggest songs, his multi-platinum RIAA award for the Greatest Hits album. He got that when they sold 15 million copies, which is an insane amount. That's a Greatest Hits album, but just one of those things that I don't know how much I would necessarily want some of those things, but for the hardcore Journey fans, for the hardcore Steve Perry fans, because that's another band where there has been a division in the fans over the years where there were a lot of people that sided with Steve Perry and kind of gave up on whatever Journey was doing post that time. This is a really great way to potentially raise some money for people who desperately need it. And I have a feeling that even though some of the price tags that you mentioned earlier, and I'm sure we'll mention again, might be out of my price range for what I'd want to pay for it, I have a feeling that somebody's going to be willing to fork over the cash for some of this stuff.
If I told you that the item that is currently fetching the highest bid are handwritten lyrics for one of Journey's hits, what song would you guess?
I mean, you would guess, like, Don't Stop Believing, just because it's probably the one that got the most commercial success years after it was.
There are actually, from what I can tell, 3 lyric sheets. One is a solo song of his. The other 2 are Journey songs.
I guess Oh Sherry would be his solo song.
Foolish Heart.
Oh, that's a great song, too, actually.
Foolish Heart is currently, with 34 bids, sitting at $4,100.
Okay.
Don't Stop Believin' at 29 bids is sitting at $10,100.
Wow.
And our winner, Faithfully.
Oh, okay.
55 bids and currently sitting at $112,000.
Wow.
Which is mind-blowing.
It is.
Nothing is even remotely close to that price on here.
So it does beg the question, if you sit here and think about those 3 songs in a vacuum and forget the popularity level, I think it's probably fair to say that Faithfully is a better written song than the other 2.
And clearly, some rich dude and his wife had that song at their wedding, and that's why it's driven this high of a price, because that song is the one that's most likely going to have sentimental value to an individual.
Yeah, I would say
it's a great song. There's no question.
It is. And you know, Foolish Heart's a great song also. Don't Stop Believing, unfortunately, just a victim of just being overplayed on the radio, because it's a great song too. And, you know, when you hear it in a place that you don't expect to hear it, it's, you know, people will sing along with it.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you know, it's still got that, you know, thing that pulls you into the song. But, you know, it was another one that was written to be a hit, clearly, and served its purpose. But there are other ones that are certainly better. But interesting that Faithfully, and I think you're right on the money with that. Definitely a sentimental value thing. But, you know, he's probably well on his way to raising at least $150,000 for charity, which is awesome. And the Blabbermouth article likely has, in fact, it does have a link to the auction site. If you're a rich person that would like to throw some money around, you can certainly do that.
Yeah, the website is darkivescollectibles.com. Let's say maybe you didn't want to blow out the budget. You want to help. You want a piece of Steve Perry / Journey memorabilia. Currently, it's $775. You can get the Journey Greatest Hits 2 signed vinyl.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
So, you know, that's fine. There's another Greatest Hits signed vinyl at $800. Let's see. You can get the Steve Perry Street Talk signed cassette for $850. That's where the bid is currently at. So, yeah, I mean, not everything is $112,000, but, you know, it's for a good cause, and prices are prices.
So that's an interesting one, because the signed vinyl, a vinyl in general is something you would still play. Like, you get it, you're going to put it on the record player, but obviously being signed, you're not going to want to do that. The cassette, you have no interest in playing that at this point, but at the same time, you can't, it would look weird just hanging on your wall.
Display.
Like, it's not, it doesn't have that value of putting it up in a place where people would want to see it.
It's like what vinyl has on all the other physical medium for music, short of like reel to reel, I suppose. Like, you can display vinyl. The artwork is huge and looks really cool on your wall. But yeah, cassettes, like, it's just not the same. Like, if you had all of them and you could like frame them in some kind of like shadow box kind of way to display like the CD, the vinyl, and the cassette, that'd be neat. But yeah, by itself, it's just not super displayable.
Yeah, and definitely not. But again, definitely some things if maybe your budget's a little bit lower. But if you're, like I said, rolling in the money, get in on one of those big items. But again, really cool. Love to see when people give back, and it's not something he has to do, obviously, but something he's willing to do, and certainly, hopefully, he raises a bunch of money, because that would be really cool. One other story, because we do like to focus on box sets, because to me it's kind of fascinating to see, you know, what you get in these box sets and what they go for, because, you know, the price tag on some of these are pretty reasonable, some of them are not as reasonable. But this story in particular is about a Rush box set. The album's 2002 to 2012 to 7 LP box set, still available, not on their website, which was the thing I was a little concerned about, because I clicked on their website link and it's already sold out from there. But Rhino Records still has it available. They only made 3,000 copies of this, so if this is something you want to get your hands on, I wouldn't wait too much longer. It's only been out for a couple days, and it's probably not going to last. By the time we do this show again next week, my guess is it will be sold out there as well. You know, obviously, not necessarily their biggest commercial albums, but still really good music there, and we know the hardcore Rush fans will eat this up, but just interesting, both this collection, and I know you kind of did a little further research into some of the other LP collections that are available, which is also kind of a fascinating topic.
Yeah, so kind of getting into this box set, like you mentioned, it includes 2002's Vapor Trails, 2004's Feedback, 2007 Snakes and Arrows, and 2012's Clockwork Angels. Yeah, I checked out Rhino's website because I know they have a lot of different box sets, things that maybe I'm not familiar with or just didn't realize were available. But if maybe you miss out on the Rush box set, you can check out some of these others, and maybe this will tide over your need for new vinyl. They have the David Lee Roth, the Warner Recordings box set, 5 LP for $125. You have the Hootie and the Blowfish, the Atlantic Years box set, 6 LPs for $150. We have Van Halen, the collection, 1978 to 1984, basically the David Lee Roth years, 6 LP for $150. And then one that kind of caught my attention, Pantera, the complete studio albums, kind of. It doesn't include the glam Pantera stuff, but 1990 to 2000, a picture disc box set for $150 as well. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of really cool stuff like that on their site. If you want to collect collector's box vinyl, even CDs, they have those as well. It's probably worth taking a look at it.
Yeah, and I mentioned that there have been some we've seen over the time that maybe it doesn't line up with the price, but I think overall, by and large, most of these bands and or record labels have found a pretty good price point for a lot of these. Where we just watched the video of Metallica going through their load set that has just an insane amount of stuff, and you just watch everything that's in there, and you just think, that's a pretty good price. Like, I feel like overall they're priced up a little bit because obviously it is a collector's item. It's not for everybody, but at the same time, they're not pricing it for the very highest end collectors. If you're a fan of the band and you have expendable income of any kind, there's a good chance you can get your hands on a lot of these sets for a pretty reasonable price.
Yeah, absolutely. And since we are kind of on the topic of vinyl, something I mentioned last week as far as feeling old and albums becoming older and celebrating anniversaries. I mentioned Avenged Sevenfold, the 20th anniversary of City of Evil. They did announce that they will be taking pre-orders on the 20th anniversary Silver Nugget vinyl set for it.
Okay.
$36.98 is the price. Special silver foil packaging, exclusive color variants. Looks like it's a double vinyl. Great album. So if you are a vinyl collector and looking to celebrate what is still really hard to believe is 20 years old, you can check that out on a7xworld.com.
Yeah, it is kind of hard to believe. And, I kind of had one of those moments this week being in Atlanta and, walking by the Centennial Village where they have the Olympic rings and just thinking, that's going to be 30 years next year since the Atlanta Olympics of 1996. And that's a little sobering sometimes. Yeah. But, again, a lot of great box sets out there for vinyl. And, we try to spotlight them when we can just because we know there are people out there that like these bands, and it's a great chance to get your band's best music in kind of a cool format that's still going strong. Still live and kicking. So definitely check that out. That wraps up our news headlines for this week. Don't forget to check out our website, nerdcastempire.com. Of course, you can listen to previous episodes of the Nerdcast Empire. We'll have our podcast backlog updated here soon, so stay tuned for that. If you do listen to us on the podcast network, if that's the only place you listen to us, you won't know that until they get updated because you're not going to hear this. We, of course, encourage you to check out twitch.tv/nerdcastempire or youtube.com/@nerdcastempire. Those are the places you can hear us live, and we're going to be live again tomorrow night as the news podcast makes its triumphant return. The Nerdcast News Report, 7 o'clock Eastern Time. We got a lot to catch up on tomorrow night. The big news story since we've been off on our little hiatus is the Switch 2 has come out. We'll talk about all things good, bad, and ugly with the Switch 2 coming up tomorrow, so make sure you check that out, 7 o'clock Eastern Time, here on the Nerdcast Empire. And, of course, next Sunday we'll be back with another episode of the Hard Rock Empire. It'll be the music of May the 23rd coming up next week, so make sure you check that out. And speaking of new music, that's what we're about to do right now. It is time to get to the bands of the week. And as I always mention, each and every week Mike pulls all of the new releases for a given date. That given date in this case is May the 16th. And then he puts one track off of each of those albums that he can find on a YouTube playlist. That playlist is currently being shared in the chat on both YouTube and Twitch. Mike goes through and listens to every single track on that playlist, and he can tell you there's good and there's maybe not so good, but there's probably something for everybody each and every week. After that, we go through and we pick 2 albums each to spotlight on this podcast, and that is what we bring to you. And a reminder that if you are with us live, that's the best chance you have of hearing audio clips from these albums. If you're joining us on the podcast network, YouTube, Spotify, or not YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, you will not get to hear the audio clips. So that kind of wraps up what this is all about. Of course, if you're a longtime listener to the Hard Rock Empire, you know that very well. And as I mentioned in our open, felt like this was a step forward in music this week. The last couple weeks have been a little bit thin. I don't know if that's a reality or if it was just that first week after we took that, 3 or 4 weeks off. We just had such a strong first date right out of the gate that it kind of skewed our opinions on the next 2 weeks. But this week, May the 16th has made a strong comeback. Very good week in music. I thought a lot of really good options and a lot of variety in choice this week. So that made it enjoyable. But it is time to get to that choice. And Mike will kick things off with his first pick of the week. Mike, what do you have for us?
Yeah, to your point, definitely some things on there that I need to give a deeper listen to that I just haven't gotten around to yet after coming up with my 2 picks for the week. But yeah, it was a solid week. Going into my first pick, we are looking at the second full-length album from the Rockford, Illinois-based thrash metal band. The band is Patchwork, and their newest album is Scars.
Yeah, the both of the picks you made this week I thought were really interesting picks. Not that they're not normally interesting picks, but I felt like both of them did something a little bit differently than each other, but they also brought something that was a little bit outside the box from maybe the melodic rock type stuff that sometimes fills the playlist. But these guys are really good.
Yeah, we talk a lot about traditional metal bands or thrash bands that kind of harken back to like the 80s thrash scene, and these guys kind of do that, but yeah, they kind of have a little bit of a unique edge to them, which I really enjoy. This is the follow-up to their 2015 debut album, Exit Wounds. The band formed back in 2010, and they are made up of Heath Gruner on vocals, Brad Carlson on guitars, Lisa Sanchez on bass, and Dave Caruana on drums. Mentioned on their Bandcamp, the album serves as a conceptual sequel to the 2015 album Exit Wounds, with the concept that the violence that caused the exit wounds would ultimately leave you with scars. Makes sense. They can carry pain, but also show survival. I really enjoyed the thrashiness of the album, but what kind of hooked me was a lot of times with bands like that, you end up with either super harsh vocals or super melodic vocals, and I thought that these guys kind of found that perfect middle ground of strong vocals that weren't too melodic or weren't too harsh. They were just kind of right in the sweet spot for a thrash band, I think. At times, it kind of reminded me of like Phil Anselmo from Pantera. That was kind of what I thought of. A reviewer I saw compared them to Dee Snider, which maybe to some degree, but I would think more like Phil Anselmo, maybe a little bit of John Bush, but either way, not a bad thing at all. The album also boasts quite a few guest appearances. You have Bobby Gustafson from the former guitarist from Overkill and Violence, Cragen Loom, the guitarist for the band Heathen, Dallas Toller Wade, the former guitarist and vocalist from the band Nile and currently of Narcotic Wasteland, Michael Gilbert, the guitarist from Flotsam and Jetsam, and Todd Paluzzi, a guitarist out of Rockford who's played on numerous albums from Beyond Threshold, Cooked Grass, Detached, and The Reggie. Yeah, I'm a big fan of running into bands who are influenced by the 80s thrash scene. I think what's cool about this is this isn't the same kind of band that we always run into inspired by the 80s thrash scene. I think they give it a little bit of a uniqueness, which I think is good when you have this kind of movement of traditional metal that's building and growing. You got to have that variety, and I think these guys definitely provide that. The album's 13 songs long and just over an hour. It's definitely worth taking a listen to front to back. If I were to pick standout tracks, I would go with Scars, Fallout, Methuselah, Skies and Flames, and The Empty, as well as the track that I picked to take a listen to, the song Relic.
Check these guys out. This is Patchwork with their new album Scars. This is the 4th track off of this album, Relic. We'll check out a little bit of that right now.
Caught in the web of your mistrust. No matter what, it's not enough. Your brand of hatred cannot last. You're just a relic from my past.
Yeah, we can definitely listen to more of that guitar solo that kicks in right, right after that
Yeah.
part. But no, I really like these guys' sound. Like you said, definitely have that thrash, feeling to it, but a little bit different at the same time. And the vocals, I think you were right on the money. And Phil Anselmo, I think, is a better comparison than Dee Snider. Like, not, nothing wrong with Dee Snider. Love Dee Snider, but it feels a little bit like Dee Snider would definitely be 2 steps closer to the melodic end, I think, of those type of vocals, where this is clearly like 2 steps the other direction. But no, they've got a great sound, and like you said, I think the vocals work really well with the music. It's not too harsh, but you bring the harshness when you need to kind of punctuate a point, and overall, what I've heard of it so far has been really good.
Yeah, I definitely into it. Kind of going into their music again real quick, I think their thrashiness to me almost sounds like the stuff that you'd expect harsh vocals to. Like it's not as refined as some of like the bands started to become from like the big four, as far as almost like more musicianship oriented and less just heavy and thrashy. These guys definitely bring the thrashiness, but it's good to hear that the vocals maintain that melody to a certain degree.
Well, I think that's how it's going to be more mainstream to all rock fans, and ones that maybe aren't as palatable to the harsh vocals, myself being kind of one of those people. I think we'll hear this and see, that's appropriately harsh. Like, it's right where it needs to be. And it's not grating. It's powerful. You get that vibe from it too. So really good stuff. Definitely check these guys out. First release of the week, Patchwork. Really good stuff from them. As always, you have 2 picks each and every week, and a little more local, I would say, for pick number 2. What do you have for your second pick this week?
Yeah, a band from kind of right down the road, less than an hour away, I would guess. But this is the 6th studio album from a Dayton, Ohio punk band. The band is called The Raging Nathans, and the album is Room for One More.
Yeah, this was, we talk about variety on our playlist, and to me, this was one that stood out as definitely being a little bit different than some of the other stuff that we typically pick, but always cool to see a local band, and Dayton just about an hour up the road from us. It's great to see them doing great things, and I think they've kind of hit a home run with this latest release.
Yeah, absolutely, and they certainly seem to think so as well, based on what's on their Bandcamp. But the band consists of Josh Goldman on guitars and vocals, Nick Hamby on guitars and vocals, Christian Rohrig on bass and vocals, and Patrick Kost on drums. We spend a lot of time spotlighting bands who play music that, the bands themselves are current, they're active, they're not retro acts, but the music they play maybe isn't necessarily what's in the spotlight anymore. It's not what the industry has deemed is what needs to be selling and should be successful. But it's great that there are bands still doing it. I like the fact that we can find them and talk about them. And a lot of times it's thrash metal, it's power metal, traditional metal, AOR, arena rock type stuff. So it's kind of cool today to pick up on a band that's playing punk music, maybe a little to the pop punk side, but still punk enough to not alienate people, I think. And this album is great. These guys do a great job at bringing catchiness and like a pop sensibility to their sound while not selling out, I would presume, if that makes sense. The Bandcamp page uses the phrase melodic punk a few times, and I think that's a pretty good way to put it, because ultimately, this stuff isn't pop music, not in 2025, but it's melodic. I haven't jumped into their back catalog, but their Bandcamp does tout that this album is their most powerful and fully realized record to date. It's kind of an interesting story. Their record label, Rad Girlfriend Records, was actually started and run by the founding member of the band, Josh Goldman. So it kind of reminds you of like the Bad Religion, Brett Gurewitz Epitaph Records situation, where the guy who was one of the founders of the band also has a record label. So that's really cool. The album is a quick, easy listen, a la Bad Religion maybe. 12 tracks over 32 minutes. And for someone like me in my early 40s, it definitely kind of gives you this nostalgic feeling, taking you back to the early 2000s. Even if I didn't fully appreciate this kind of music maybe at that point in time, it's definitely something that I can get into today. Standout tracks include The Grudge, Misery and Company, Front Towards Enemy, Back to Yesterday, and the track that I picked to listen to, the song Nick at Night.
Let's check these guys out. The Dayton, Ohio band, the Raging Nathans, with their new release, Room for One More. This is track number 7 off of that album, Nick at Night. So let's check that out right now.
Palisades and promenades, stark reminders of who we're not. What fills the void inside of you? 'Cause you don't get to be happy. I just wanna help you, even if you don't want me to. I can't seem to help you. Or do you deserve what's coming to you? Now you leaving me here with the whole ship to steer. There's a hole in stake.
Yeah, I mean, first off, you mentioned it being an easy listen, 32 minutes over 12 tracks, definitely, has that same Bad Religion vibe as far as, we're going to get in, we're going to give you the message, and then we're going to get out. We're not here, we're not here for a long time, we're here for a good time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, I think this type of music plays really well with the short form. Like, you wouldn't want to listen to a progressive song that was 2 minutes long. Wouldn't make any sense. Just like a song like that over 7 minutes wouldn't really make any sense. Like,
it's a challenge for sure.
Yeah.
to write a song in that style beyond 5 minutes, I would suggest.
Yeah, and I think it's about knowing what works for whatever type of music you're trying to play. And for these guys, this is perfect. It's again just it hits you in the face. It gives you that power quickly, and then it gets out. And I think that's something that we mentioned Bad Religion a ton. That's both of us really love Bad Religion. It's that style that's worked for them so far, for so many years. That works here, I think, as well. It does get in and it's catchy. I think melodic punk is a good way to describe it because it is not. Some punk music is, to me, and maybe because I'm a little older, sometimes it's a little grating. This doesn't feel that way because it does have that melody. The catchiness of the chorus, it really kind of brings you in. And these guys, they should be happy with this album. I think they've done a great job with it, and really excited to, who knows, maybe see these guys live at some point since they're not very far from us.
Yeah, I've never really been a big fan of the kind of punk music that ultimately grew into like hardcore. That's never really been my thing. So I definitely enjoy the melodic side to this. And they mentioned it on their Bandcamp, and it definitely holds true. I really respect kind of the DIY attitude that these guys have, to the point where their front man is running a record label, and not only just getting his music out there, but also providing a vehicle to other bands, presumably in that same genre, to kind of keep growing it in a time where it's not as easy to do that.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about that a lot on this podcast, that there are these record labels out there keeping certain types of music alive at a time where it's not on the radio. It's not in your record store necessarily. It's great to see, and it's great to see these guys just churn along and releasing what they believe is their most complete album. Who am I to argue with them? So definitely check those guys out. The Raging Nathans with their new release, really good stuff. Definitely encourage you to check it out. Well, we're going to go back as we get into my picks to something that it is a little more traditional to what we pick on this podcast, but sometimes an album is good enough that you just have to pick something that is the obvious pick. And with that in mind, we are starting things off with a Frontiers release this week, a American rock band from Nashville, Tennessee, just down the road, about 4.5 hours from us. This is Giant with Stand and Deliver. These guys, of course, formed back in 1987. Originally, it was formed by Dan Huff, Alan Pasqua, David Huff, and Mike Brignardello. Huff and Brignardello are still there. David Huff, I should say, joined by Kent Hilly on vocals, who does a phenomenal job, and Jimmy Westerlund on guitars. Of course, Kent Hilly comes over from Perfect Plan, came in over the last few years to sing for them, as Dan Huff just too busy to kind of do that full time. And Jimmy Westerlund coming in from One Desire. Now, what's interesting is on two fronts, Westerlund also taking mixing duties along with a guy whose name you may recognize, Alessandro Del Vecchio,
of course,
who also adds some keyboards onto this album because, of course, why not? And Dan Huff, as he's done really as this band has continued, coming in to write 3 of the songs on the album. So he's staying involved in Giant, even if he doesn't really have the time to dedicate to singing and touring with the band anymore. They started back up in 2009 when they joined Frontiers. This is their third album with the label and sixth album overall. If you like melodic rock, you're gonna like this. Like if you like the classic Giant stuff, even with a new lead singer, they still sound amazing. I think bringing in Westerlund and Del Vecchio to both play on the album and mix the album seems to have paid off for them very well. But this is just really good stuff. If you're a fan of melodic rock. Standout tracks include It's Not Right, A Night to Remember, Stand and Deliver, and the song we're going to listen to on the podcast is Hold the Night. Check these guys out. It's Giant, back once again with their sixth album, Stand and Deliver. This is the third track off of that album. It is Hold the Night. Let's listen to a little bit of that now. Again, sometimes just even if it's an obvious pick, sometimes it's just too good to leave it off of our selections. And, with these guys, they've been doing it for a long time and are still going strong. And again, this is a really good release front to back. And it's great to see Giant continue to churn along with almost their original members, at least in some form or fashion involved with the band, which is great to see. But good stuff from Giant. Their new release out on May the 16th. Mike, your thoughts on Giant?
It's like some artists and bands can just get together at any point in time and still write really good music. It's really impressive. You mentioned not currently in the band Dan Huff. It's kind of wild to think he's also the guy that produced Megadeth's Cryptic Writings and Risk. So, you had the guy who was at one point the lead singer of Giant working with Megadeth.
Yeah.
And maybe that's how they ended up with maybe a more commercial sound for Cryptic Writings. But, just kind of interesting stuff.
Yeah, it's great to see. And again, I think he's doing a lot more of the producing stuff these days, which is kind of keeping him away from being a full-time member of the band.
His credits are pretty ridiculous.
If you're working with Megadeth, there's probably nobody you're not working with.
He's all over the board too. Like, they mention his collaborations on his Wikipedia page, and you're talking like, let's see here, Martina McBride, Keith Urban. So he's like not just rock at this point. He's doing a lot of country stuff, which I think he's based in Nashville anyway, so it's probably not too surprising.
Yeah.
As far back in the 80s, though, he's working with like Peter Cetera, Barbra Streisand, Michael W. Smith. So that dude has been prolific throughout the years.
Yeah, a guy that, maybe someday should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for whatever that's worth, because clearly not just for his music in Giant, but all the stuff he's done outside has been...
And I feel like we might have mentioned it before, but, even in 2012, he produced 3 songs for Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
So, heavy hitter for sure.
For sure. So, but definitely check out the new Giant release. Like I said, even though he's not singing on it, still sounds great.
Yeah.
Just really good stuff from them. So that's my first pick for this week. As always, I have 2 picks as well, and we are going to jump to another, I don't want to say local band. They're at least somewhat regional, I guess you could say. This is the progressive heavy power metal band from Fort Wayne, Indiana. This is Echosoul with The Time of the Dragon. These guys were founded in 2019. This is their second full-length album after The End of Darkness in 2020. The band is Guy Hinton on guitars, backing vocals, screen vocals, lyricist and songwriter, Rob Lundgren on lead vocals, Randy Walton on bass, Tyler Witt or Witty on drums, and Fabio Alessandrini on drums. The Metal Robot called this power metal with teeth. I think that's probably a fair comparison. Definitely had a harder edge than some of the typical power or melodic metal that we pick on this podcast. Also had some progressive elements to it as well. The website Dead Rhetoric talked about Lundgren's vocals being influenced or reminiscent of guys like Russell Allen, Matt Barlow, Andy Darris, Ralph Sheepers. Wow. So, clearly influenced by some of the heavy hitters in this space, to say the least. It's an album that's got songs that are kind of all over the board, which is great to hear. And I think, makes for a very interesting listen from beginning to end. You have, the progressive type stuff. You have softer songs. You have harder songs. But it was all really well done. It was a really well-produced album and had a great sound. And kind of glad I found these guys because it was a really good listen. The standout tracks off of this album include Time of the Dragon, Sister Suicide, Instruments of Chaos, and the song we're going to listen to on the podcast is Hallowed Ground. Let's check out these guys now. This is Echosoul, their new album, The Time of the Dragon. This is the sixth song off this album, Hallowed Ground. Let's listen to a little bit of that now. As we talked about many times on this podcast, it is great to see that not only is this type of music still being made, but the fact that it's being made in Fort Wayne, Indiana, kind of blows your mind. This has been a music type that we've listened to a ton on this podcast. A lot of times these bands are out of Italy or Sweden or Finland, not necessarily always out of America, and you certainly don't know about the American Midwest for a home for this type of band, but these guys have really nailed it and a relatively new band, so I'm excited to kind of see where they continue to go, but good stuff from Echosoul. Mike, your thoughts?
It's kind of like the logical equivalent of Slipknot being from Iowa.
Yeah.
Like, they don't make that kind of music in Iowa. Like, you don't really think, anywhere in the States for the most part, you don't really equate with power progressive metal, which this essentially sounds like. Anytime a band releases an album called Time of the Dragon and you look at the artwork, I know I'm going to be on board. It looks like artwork that someone drew inspired by a Heroes of Might and Magic game, which is really awesome too. But yeah, it's great to see this kind of stuff being made stateside because I think as far back as when I started getting into the more melodic metal stuff, late 90s, early 2000s, I pretty much, for the most part, only had Europe to look to, and it's clear that that's not the case, and probably hasn't been for a while.
Yeah, and we just consistently find those types of bands on this podcast, which is great to see. Definitely encourage you, check out Echosoul with their new release out on May the 16th. That wraps up our new music for the week. It's time to head into the vault, where Mike and I will talk about a couple of classic albums that you need to check out. Mike, as we mentioned, each and every week is going through his vault for the second time, going through the alphabet A to Z to pick classic albums that you should check out, and we have crossed the halfway point. We are on the backside of the alphabet now with our 14th letter, the letter N. Mike, what do you have, and what was available maybe for the letter N?
Yeah, as far as the letter N goes, turns out I have a lot of Nevermore, and that's kind of the main contributor to the letter. So yeah, I was definitely searching around through my catalog, and I found this one that I haven't listened to in a while, and I kind of forgot just how awesome this album is. We are talking about from the year 2006. It is the 7th studio album from the band Nocturnal Rites. It is Grand Illusion.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to go back and listen to it again, but I feel like I remember you listening to this album, and I seem to remember it being really good, but it's been a while, I think.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of underrated because I'd forgotten how good. There were like a couple tracks that I remembered, like, oh yeah, those are awesome. But then listening to the whole thing front to back, I'm like, no, the vast majority of this is just killer. The band started in 1990 as a death metal band called Necronomic and had a demo back in 1991 kind of with that sound. A year later, they resurfaced with a second demo, which had more of like an Iron Maiden type sound to it, which was kind of them switching over to the sound that they became known for. While I haven't listened to their earlier albums, Wikipedia would suggest they had a very Halloween sound to them, which isn't really surprising. You definitely hear some Halloween, some Stradivarius here for sure. This album had a lot of guest appearances, including Yin Johansson from, obviously, Yngwie Malmsteen, Stradivarius, Rainbow, Henrik Donhage from Evergrey, Christopher W. Olivius from Bewitched and Naglfar, Stefan Elmgren from Hammerfall, and according to their Wikipedia, Per Ellefson, who is a 3-time world champion cross-country skier, who also came from the same town as the band. That one kind of blew my mind, so I had to go grab the CD and read the liner notes. And yeah, sure enough, in the liner notes toward the end, it reads, pre-chorus whammy bar chaos on Never Trust by world champion cross-country skier Per Ellefson. So yeah, he does something akin to a guitar solo in that song, apparently. Who knew?
Why not?
Yeah. The band's toured with the likes of Nightwish, Gamma Ray, Hammerfall, Labyrinth, and have played festivals like the Wacken Open Air, Sweden Rock, Gates of Metal, etc. A year later, they released the album The Eighth Sin, and then went 10 years before releasing anything new, which was 2017's Phoenix. Something I didn't realize at the time and kind of found out just today, which makes me want to check out their newest album, is that in 2017, Scar Symmetry's founder and lead guitarist Per Nilsson joined Nocturnal Rites as their lead guitarist.
Oh.
Which, big fan of Scar Symmetry. I always thought that Per Nilsson, as far as a musician, was a genius. Turns out he really is a genius, according to Wikipedia. He's a Mensa member with an IQ of 135 or higher on the Wechsler scale, which translates to 156 or higher on the Cattell scale. I don't know what scale is what. I didn't know there were multiple of them. But yeah, so it turns out the guy is really, really intelligent. Going back to the album The Grand Illusion from 2006, the lineup at that point in time consisted of Johnny Lindquist on vocals, Owe Lingvall on drums, Fredrik Manberg on guitars, Nils Norberg on guitars, and Nils Eriksson on bass. When I first found out about the album, I think it was tracks like Never Trust and Still Alive that really caught my attention, either from streaming services or from the Music Choice channels from back in the day. But either way, this is just really high-quality power metal. And kind of cool that most of the band is still with them, presuming they are still active. Metal Archives lists their status as unknown. Wikipedia calls them a band, so they suggest that they're still active. But last I saw on Setlist FM, their last tour dates were in 2019. And their last album was in 2017. Since then, in 2023, Scar Symmetry released a new album, so I don't know if these guys are just on a hiatus or what exactly. I think they had Facebook posts up to 2021, so nothing concrete to suggest that they're done, but just not really doing a whole lot. But Fredrik Manberg has been with the band since 1990 from the beginning, Nils Eriksson since 90 as well, Owe Lingvall since 1998, Johnny Lindquist, the vocalist, since 2000, and Per Nilsson has been the newest addition in 2017, so they're still fairly the core group. Standout tracks on the album include Fools Never Die, Never Trust, Still Alive, Our Wasted Days, Cuts Like a Knife, and Never Ending. Again, this is just really awesome power metal. Definitely worth checking out, and I'm excited to check out their 2017 album now.
Yeah, for sure. And, I'd like to go back and give this a full listen because, like I said, it's been many, many years. But always kind of sad when we do these vault picks, and it's like, oh, I don't know if they're still active. At least they had a Facebook page, which at least means they've been active somewhat in the more recent. You do wonder if, when you say 2019 for last tour dates, were they one of the bands that were a victim of the pandemic where they just couldn't tour and therefore, kind of went off and did their own things.
Certainly
at
possible.
That point. But hopefully at some point they'll get back together, put a new album out somewhere down the road. But definitely check those guys out. Nocturnal Rites with the Grand Illusion, not to be confused with The Grand Illusion, the Styx album, which is noted at the top of the Wikipedia page too.
Which is funny too, because going back to one of my main picks this week, Patchwork, there was an interview, I think it was on Dead Rhetoric, talking to the drummer and the bassist, and one of the two had mentioned that, and I presume they're not young by any means, not old, but not super young, but he had mentioned that the first album he owned himself was Styx. Kilroy Was Here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is kind of a wild one to own, but he had mentioned there was a track on it that was actually like pretty heavy, which you don't think about with that album. It was the song Heavy Metal Poisoning.
Oh, yeah.
Really cool song, and kind of makes me think the album's probably better than it's remembered as.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's much maligned just because of the concept and how it kind of divided the band at the time with the rocking elements of the band who are still with the band. Not really a big fan of it, but
it's like that song was like a James J.Y. Young song, so probably going to tend to be more of a rocking song.
Yeah, for sure. So interesting. That is an interesting choice for the first Styx album that you own, but really cool though. It's always great to see Styx getting a shout out on the podcast. But so my vault picks, we are going through all the Frontiers bands. We are up to the letter F, and again, we're spending 2 weeks on each letter, picking one band the 1 week, and then allowing a randomizer to pick a band the second week. F was a little bit thinner than I thought it would be, but I did find one that is just quintessential Frontiers. The band is First Signal, and the album is Face Your Fears, which is their most recent release. Probably people will know the lead singer of this band is Harry Hess, who is the lead singer of Harum Scarum. This is kind of his side project, which seems to happen a lot with Frontiers. This was released February 17th, 2023. There were not a lot of details on the Frontiers page about who all was with this band at this time, but they kind of talked about in the description of the album that the band was formed in 2010. It was a partnership between Harry Hess and German producer Dennis Ward, who produced Pink Cream 69 and Chimera. This was a situation where evidently the head of Frontier, Serafino Perugino, who we talk about a lot, presented Hess with some melodic rock songs, which were similar to what you would hear from Harum Scarum, but at the time Harum Scarum was on hiatus. So he needed a band to perform these songs, and therefore First Signal was born. And, they weren't necessarily consistent because kind of bouncing back and forth between bands. And, I should note that, once this album came out in 2023, there were some Facebook posts around it, but really not a whole lot since. So I don't know if they're on hiatus or if he's gone back to doing stuff with Harum Scarum or what might be the situation. So not sure if the project actually continues. But this is a really good album. This is Frontiers at its very finest. It's a much better album, supposedly, than their previous one, which had some mixing issues, I guess. But if you're a fan of Harum Scarum, if you're a fan of melodic rock, and you're a fan of anything Frontiers puts out, definitely encourage you to check this album out. It was actually really good. Standout tracks include Unbreakable, Shoot the Bullet, Face Your Fears, and Never Gonna Let You Go. Just another one of those random Frontiers projects that we come across on this journey through this podcast that has just put out some amazing music that there's no chance I would have ever known about this band had I not tackled this effort to go through all the letters. But definitely check those guys out, First Signal. But any thoughts, Mike?
It's kind of weird when you see the names pop up over and over again and you see the connections between them. Someone like a Dennis Ward, who... You mentioned Pink Cream 69. That was the band that Andy Darris from Halloween sang for the longest time, 87 to 94, before joining Halloween. You mentioned Chimera, which we talked about a couple weeks ago. Great band also that he sings, that Dennis Ward sings for. And also the fact that he played bass for Unisonic, which is another connection to Halloween, which was separate than Andy Darris, obviously, because Unisonic was kind of the other members of the band before Andy Darris, so just kind of a lot of wild connections there.
Yeah, and not a surprise that when you talk about those kind of connections that they would put this band together and it would sound so good, because it's like all those connecting bands are really good as well, so, or connected to people who play in really good bands. So it is the other thing you find with Frontiers and with some of these bands, that they're all kind of tied together somehow. But really cool. Definitely check those guys out. Again, I would have never listened to this if not for this project, and definitely glad I did. So we'll find another F band for next week. Might be a little more challenging, but we'll see what we can do. But that wraps up our vault. It's time to finish off this podcast with the Power Trio. It is the Hard Rock Hat Trick of the week. And, I figured with our news podcast starting back up, it was a chance to kind of do a cheap plug for our news podcast, which is a little more on the nerdy side from our music podcast. We talk about video games. We talk about music from time to time. We talk about pro wrestling.
Sometimes we talk about video game music.
Sometimes talk about video game music, but we also talk about Japanese anime in our podcast. So I figured, this is a good time. We've already done the topic, and we'll probably revisit the topic of the top 3 songs that would make great wrestling entrance themes. So I figured, why not? Let's jump into the top 3 songs that would make good anime opening themes. Now, it should be noted before we dive into this topic that if you're not maybe familiar with the anime scene, just like a TV show, or at least TV shows used to do this. I don't know if they still do this or not. They have a song that opens up the show. I think the 80s and 90s were kind of that quintessential era of sitcom theme songs. I would argue that the Perfect Strangers theme is maybe one of the all-time greats.
Yeah.
For example,
Full House, great
Full House, amazing. A lot of great music made during that time for TV shows. Anime used this as well, in large part to sell albums and promote the show. But there have been rock artists and pop artists that have, in the English-speaking world, that have translated over. And of course, it's a shame that Chris isn't with us, because probably the quintessential example of that is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, where you've had so many songs that he was influenced by while he was writing the manga, and they have now then taken them and made them into theme songs, which has kind of, in some cases, and of course, maybe the most well-known of those is Roundabout by Yes, that almost had a renaissance because of its use with JoJo's.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on top of that, you Walk Like an Egyptian, huge as well. Savage Garden.
Yes, I love that song came back.
Such a great song.
Yeah.
That I can't remember the title to. How weird is that?
Yeah.
I Want You.
Yeah, I think that's the name of the song. Yeah.
Such an iconic song for like taking you back to a period in time. It's not something I would listen to every day, but just kind of legendary. But yeah, you're right. And I think also something like Mr. Big, Shine from the original Hellsing, great ending theme. There's been a lot of good examples. Backstreet Boys have given a song to anime at some point.
Yeah, it's been wild. There've been other rock acts that have over the years jumped in as well, and that is, we have seen it. We've seen the crossover between English rock and metal and Japanese anime. So, but yeah, I mean, we threw this topic out here kind of late, so Chris a little tied up this week, not able to give us his picks, but I assume Shane probably had some picks for us this week. What did Shane throw out there?
I'd never considered this before, but like, not that this is a game show or has game show elements, but there's something to be said for picking a song that you can then reuse on multiple topics.
100%.
And Shane has done that. It's like, on one hand, I'm like, man, that's kind of lazy. On the other hand, I'm like, but they fit. Like, they're not inappropriate for the topic. And for Shane's number one, this is, I think, the 3rd time he's used it, but I can't really dispute it. So for one of the songs that would make a good anime opening, Shane has selected the song Superheroes from Ed Guy from the 2005 Superheroes EP and the 2006 album Rocket Ride. How do you argue that?
You can't. I mean, he's right. Like, that's 100% an anime theme. Like, he's right. And, there's nothing that says we have to pick new songs, because at some point we'll forget what we've picked for some of these. And so, no, especially maybe last minute also kind of leans toward picking something that's a repeat. But no, I think he's right on the money with that. That's a great song that would definitely fit an anime opening theme.
Really hard to argue that one. But his other picks are just as solid, I think. Number 2, he picked the song Super Beast from Rob Zombie.
Okay.
From his 1998 album Hellbilly Deluxe. Great song. And Rob Zombie has music. And maybe part of it is that he's so in tune with filmmaking and kind of classic horror type stuff that his music is just predisposed to kind of fitting as a theme to something.
Yeah.
But I think you could pick a lot of White and Rob Zombie stuff and it would kind of work.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And cool that I got to see it live recently, which is always a plus.
Yeah,
despite
for
the
sure.
technical difficulties his set seemed to suffer from. I also didn't realize, and obviously there's 2 Hellbilly Deluxe albums from Rob Zombie, both great albums. I didn't realize, and I assumed that it was a reference to something, but I didn't know what. According to Wikipedia, though, the title Hellbilly Deluxe is a reference to the 1987 Dwight Yoakam album Hillbilly Deluxe.
Oh, okay.
Who knew?
Most of the Dwight Yoakam I would know would probably come from the mid to late 90s when I was working at a country radio station.
Yeah.
Not real familiar with the stuff in the 80s, but that's interesting.
Yeah, I had no idea. So moving on to his number 3 pick, this is another artist that I think probably has a lot of songs that could be used as themes, whether it be anime or wrestling. I think we've heard it in the past, and that is the song Fight Song from Marilyn Manson.
Yeah.
I mean, Marilyn Manson has had music used in wrestling, so why not apply that to anime? Fight Song is from the 2000 album Hollywood in the Shadow of the Valley of Death. Great track. Another track off that album, Disposable Teens, is also kind of peak Marilyn Manson. Just really good stuff.
Yeah, that was, I think, maybe one of his strongest eras of his career, and yeah, it's hard to argue with that. That's a really solid list once again. Shane coming through with 3 really good picks. I know you have the picks as well. What did you come up with for the power trio for anime themes?
Yeah, mine may not be as familiar to a lot of listeners, but I definitely invite you to check them out just to kind of, first, because they're great songs, but secondly, just to see that, yeah, they would work in this context. Number 1 for me is from the band Sonata Arctica. It is their song Ain't Your Fairy Tale from 2004's Reckoning Night. Yeah,
it's a great choice. Definitely has that catchy hook. It's got the power. Definitely probably an adventurous arc of some sort of show,
absolutely.
Like something's going down.
It's not the first open.
It is not. It's probably the second or third, but no, good choice. Sonata Arctica is another band that probably has several really good choices for this category.
Number 2 for me, we mentioned the founder and lead guitarist from this band a little bit earlier, but the artist we're talking about for number 2 is Scar Symmetry and the song The Iconoclast.
Okay. Yeah, that's a song I haven't heard in a while, but yeah, another really good choice.
Yeah, Scar Symmetry, they had kind of this run where every first track on their album would be a song that I think would work as an anime opening. You had the Iconoclast, you had the Anomaly, you had what was the other one? The Illusionist. They're all like the something, but yeah, I mean, the guitar work and just the blending of the harsh and clean vocals, like any of their songs where they really lean in the clean vocals for the chorus, just sounds so good and works so well for this.
Yeah, 100%.
Number 3, we are talking about the band The Rasmus and the song In My Life from their 2003 album Dead Letters.
Yeah, okay, The Rasmus. That's not one I expected to hear today, but really good choice.
Yeah, they had that period of time where they were really churning out some cool rock, almost gothic rock type stuff. A couple albums after this, their sound kind of changed to where I wasn't really following with them, but a lot of the tracks off Dead Letters are just solid, and this one here would just fit perfectly for an anime.
Yeah, those are all really good choices and a little bit different. Obviously, Sonata Arctica is a band we talk about a lot, but the other two maybe not as much, so that's always good for these types of lists. So really solid picks. I have a couple honorable mention picks. I always like to pick more than 3 because I'm always the last one to go, which is I choose that, but I like to have some extras so we don't have repeats if we can help it on this category. But with just the 3 of us, we didn't have any repeats this week. So honorable mention, we mentioned Journey earlier, Separate Ways, Worlds Apart.
Oh, yeah.
Just the chorus alone has anime theme written all over it. And then how about Dio and Rainbow in the Dark? Yeah. Again, probably not the first open to a show, but something crazy's going on. Probably an isekai, if I had to guess.
I could get behind that.
But 2 honorable mention picks. One thing I wanted to do, because it was at top of mind when I came up with this category, is pick a song that we have talked about on this podcast as a band that we have discovered because of this podcast. So how about we talk about Nestor with Teenage Rebel for the first choice. If you've not, it was one of our top picks from 2024, but I think a really solid choice.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking like one of the albums of the year from 2024. It's just so good. And yeah, I totally agree. This would be a great anime song.
The other 2 bands I'm sure we've talked about on the podcast. The second one, maybe not a song we've talked about, but it's off of their greatest hits. It's Night Ranger with Rumors in the Air. Definitely has a chorus that kind of builds to that crescendo that I think would make for a good anime theme. Not maybe the Night Ranger song that everybody would think of, but I just wanted to kind of go something a little bit different there. And then finally, Genesis with Land of Confusion. Again, just kind of a wild song, but also a song that's kind of got a story to it. So, you kind of have that element as well, and a very catchy chorus. Really dig some Genesis, so I thought I'd throw that one in there.
It just makes me wonder when you say that, like how many people have made AMVs using the Disturbed cover of Land of Confusion?
100.
Let's see here.
'Cause that's the other thing we didn't do is we didn't pick Fall Out Boy.
Yeah.
Which I feel like is a missed opportunity because...
Attack on Titan, 104th Cadet Corps, AMV, Land of Confusion, Disturbed. Disturbed, Land of Confusion. Oh, that's the actual music video. Really? Wow. Various anime. That looks like Jujutsu Kaisen. More. Ooh, an Inuyasha AMV, Land of Confusion.
Nice.
Gate, Dragon Ball Z, because obviously. Ghost in the Shell, Dragon Ball Super.
Maybe the Disturbed cover that was bigger than I realized.
Oh, it was huge. I mean, if we're being fair, it's probably one of the best covers of all time.
It's a great cover.
It's tremendous. It honors the original while being a Disturbed song.
Yeah, and they did really do a good job with that. And if you haven't checked out the original, if you only know the Disturbed song, check it out too. Oh, that's interesting. But yeah, there were a bunch of AMV themes that we probably could have picked for this that would have made a lot of sense as well. Fall Out Boy's almost their entire catalog probably would have
what you
did in the dark. Yes. I'm actually a little disappointed in myself that I didn't pick that song because it is in every, for a while there was a stretch where it was in every AMV contest.
That's got to be one of those like no stairway kind of rules for AMV contests. Like, no, you cannot use that song.
Fall Out Boy themselves may be reaching that category where it's just like you can't use any Fall Out Boy song.
The problem is that the songs that people are using instead are usually terrible.
Oh, they're so bad. But I would run a AMV contest where you only got Fall Out Boy songs to use.
See, I was a big fan of that idea where like you all have to use the same thing.
Yeah.
That way it is apples to apples. It's not one person playing basketball and one person playing football and you determining who's better.
Yeah, because it's, the music choice shouldn't impact my ability to judge that. But
I'm human and I don't like bad music.
Yeah, that's very true.
Sorry.
Just... Maybe we'll talk. Maybe that'll be a topic somewhere down the road as well. Another topic I'm sure we can revisit because there are lots of great theme songs that potentially could be out there in the rock world. And of course, let us know what your choices are. It's a good time for me to plug the Discord because I forgot to paste that link in there. So we'll do that real quick before we sign off. Check out our Discord page. Join our Discord page. You can let us know what your power trio, and if you have a topic you would like us to take on, because goodness knows, sometimes it's tough to come up with a power trio topic. Let us know, and we'll take it on, and we'll let you know what we think of your power trio topic. So join us in the Discord. That is where we kind of keep our schedule updated as well, and when we stream on our own channels, it'll pop up there as well. So definitely check that out at the link you see in the chat if you are on Twitch or you are on YouTube. And no matter where you are, it is time to bring this podcast to a close for another week. Thank you so much for joining us once again. Really appreciate it. Again, we'll be back with some news this week. Tomorrow, 7 o'clock Eastern Time, the Nerdcast News Report makes its triumphant return. And, of course, we'll also have another episode for you on Friday at 7 o'clock Eastern. And then 1 week from tonight, we're back with another episode of the Hard Rock Empire. It is the music of May the 23rd coming up next week. Big thanks to Mike, as always, for putting all this together. And a big thanks to you and for Shane. We don't want to forget Shane, but a big thanks to you for listening wherever and whenever you happen to listen to our podcast. We'll be back tomorrow for the Nerdcast News Report and 1 week from tonight for another Hard Rock Empire. And until then, don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.